exciting and dangerous times. And what I'd like to know from you, James, is what's on your mind? What's on your radar screen right now?
Um, well, a fair number of things. I mean, obviously, the election is near the top of my radar screen because I think it's going to be pretty consequential. There are, I guess, impacts of the election that we have to see. I don't know which way the election is going to go. I don't claim to know. I have a very strong suspicion what a completely fair and honest election would look like right now, which is a landslide for Trump. But I don't know that that's the ballpark we play in. And so what's going to happen? That's a big concern. And I'm not really a politico. I don't study political movements of that in that nature, at least not contemporary ones. I do study some historical ones. Um, and I can only make so many guesses. I'm certainly not a political pundit or a pollster or, somebody who crunches the statistics on that and makes guesses. But I'm very concerned that they may come out directly and try to do a in your face South America scale steal, and at which point we end up with the installation of Kamala Harris as president, and I would assume a unbelievable reaction from the American people, and in particular, its radical right wing will be kind of trying to lead the charge and seize the momentum there. So I'm very concerned about that radical right wing, even though it seems like it's a bad time to worry about it before the election. Um, B, Trump could win the election. Um, and in that situation, a couple or several different things could happen. There could be a uprising from the left. Antifa could be let off its chain. Who knows how many, various crises might get manufactured maybe almost immediately to create tremendous instability in the world. And again, the question is how much of that is baiting the radical right to uprise back against it, tempting us into violence or something completely inappropriate that they can then weaponize in some way against us. Question is, will they certify if Trump wins in January? January 6th comes around, will they certify? There are a number of different strategies that they could employ to avoid doing that. One is just to refuse. Another is to claim that Trump has done something illegal in the time in between and cook up some pretext, or to catch him ranting about something. So they could drag out the election results again like they did in 2020, make it very unclear, and try to get Trump talking about some mysterious Kraken or some kind of weird, you know, Dominion voting thing or whatever it happens to be, to discredit his claim on the presidency, even if the numbers come down in his favor. And another option is that Trump could just win outright. There's a general outcry, but nothing too significant from the left, and he becomes president in January, as one would expect. And that a couple of things could happen. Then you could end up in that situation I mentioned before, which is the relentless crisis after crisis after crisis scenario to make his presidency virtually impossible, to make him depend on the agencies that he wishes to shrink and close, to pin him in. And another is to actually seize the momentum of winning, so to speak, to cause people on MAGA's side to overplay their hand, and again, led by this radical right. So I see a lot of possible dynamics, and I don't actually know how to tell between them which ones are most likely. But I'm very, very concerned about a few things that are happening. One of those things is that there is a very definite attempt to cause a rise of the radical right. I'm hearing from pastors all over the country that it's affecting these are Protestants, obviously, affecting their churches. I'm hearing mixed stories from within Catholic communities. Um, yeah, so I'm concerned that that's a real phenomenon. Most people misunderstand what I'm concerned about with it. They think that, oh, James is afraid they're going to take over. No, I don't think so. I think that it's like, imagine like the car is going down the street, right? This isn't an operation to seize control of the steering wheel. It's an operation to blow a tire and put the car in the ditch. And it's a completely different program. It's not meant to win. It's meant to do just enough damage to the conservative side of politics to throw everything off. And I'm very concerned about that rising right now. Not because I think there's some organic push to make it, or like something's just happening. People are just that frustrated. I actually don't. I've traveled America too much, talked to too many audiences, too many people. That's not real. There is a lot of frustration, but it's not manifesting that way. What I think it is that I think there's an awful lot behind it. I think there are bad actors, whether they're foreign governments, whether they are our own government, that are funding Pied Pipers to pull this movement into being. I think there's a far larger amount of money and coordination behind it than people suspect. And so I'm very, my mind's very much on that. And then there's all the regular anti-woke stuff that I do, which is I'm still piecing together to finish writing a book about Mao. I'm still thinking and developing
Oh,
my thoughts on how political warfare works. I'm studying Lenin. I'm trying to keep up
Mal,
with the UN.
my husband, this is his old little red book when he was a radical back in his teen years.
Yeah.
So you're writing a book on Mao. I can't wait till that comes out. What does it look like a year from now?
Well, I
Or
well, I wrote three-quarters of the first draft many months ago, and I decided that to finish the very last chapter I could sit down and write today if I wanted to, but there's two chapters before that I would have to get through according to the outline that I've arranged and the plan that I have. And I decided I needed to do more research into the Cultural Revolution. I know a lot of the 1950s Mao and a pretty good amount about the early 1960s Mao, but then when we get to the Cultural Revolution, which earnestly started in 66, but the groundwork really started getting laid in 62 to 66. I'm less clear on what happened, how it happened, and I want to make sure I know what I want to say, which doesn't depend heavily on that history, but I want to make sure I have that history right. So I started trying to read the history, and I just keep getting bogged down. Reading is a very difficult luxury sometimes when you're busy. And so I've been bogged down and haven't completed it. But the arc of the thing, basically the book, I want to call it Maoism with American Characteristics. And I've organized it such that there's a term that I coined last year or early this year, I guess, in February, called the politics of compliance. And the first four chapters of the book outline what I call the politics of compliance, which in fact, when I wrote the first draft of it, I had not yet come up with that term. So I have to rewrite it in terms of that. But the idea is basically how you separate populations into antagonistic groups and use government power to arrange negative circumstances so that you will get the people who go along with the program, those who comply, to hate and blame the people who don't. We could talk all day long about how Mao did this over and over and over again, or I could point people to something they experienced in their own lives, which was the vaccine with COVID. So with COVID, we were going to have to shut down for 2 weeks. And if everybody did what they were supposed to, after 2 weeks, we were going to be able to open back up. Well, not everybody did what they were supposed to. So now the 2 weeks has to become 3, has to become 8, has to become indefinite. Everybody has to wear their masks. Everybody has to socially distance. Everybody has to stay home as much as possible. Oh, and the virus just keeps having another surge. There's another peak. There's another variant. And that's because people won't do what they're supposed to. So all the people who are trying and doing and putting their lives on hold and that are suffering are getting madder and madder and madder at the people who refuse to go along with the program. Then they introduced the vaccine, or what they called a vaccine. It's not even a vaccine, and made it contingent for employment in a lot of sectors and so on. And you have Joe Biden standing as president of the United States with a red background looking like an angry man screaming, we're going to have, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And the reason, what they're telling you, it's the government locking us down. But what the government's also telling us is the reason I'm locking you down is because some people won't do what they're supposed to. So all the people who want their lives back, especially the ones who did what they were told, get very mad at the other people. And I call this dynamic hatecraft. And so the first 4 chapters are designed to outline how that works, how Mao organized it, and why it's characteristic of what I call Maoism, and then in practice, and then how that applies to whether it's COVID, whether it's climate change, whether it's, even regular politics. If you support Trump, you're deplorable. We could all go back to normal. We could turn the page if we could just get Trump out of politics. If you look, In Kamala Harris's recent disastrous interview with Brett Baier on Fox, he said, "What are we turning the page from? What are we moving on from?" Right? And what did she say? She Everybody makes fun of it because she said something that didn't seem to make sense. But this is their logic. Trump is running for president. He's been running for president. Trump is still in the picture. And so as long as their political enemy is still in the picture, we can't get to the next thing. We can't turn the page. We can't get to the better future. And so that makes the people who it sounds idiotic and is idiotic to us, but it's actually evil because it makes the people who support her, who just want things to calm down and go back to normal, to say, yeah, of course, Trump is still a political figure. And that's what makes this so crazy. We want the world to go back to like it was 20 years ago when it was nice. Everybody was getting along, but then Trump had to get involved in politics. This is the logic of the left. So there's a hate craft just in that. And then, of course, all the identity politics, which Mao could be, I think, honestly, not that they didn't do it in the Soviet Union because Lenin and Stalin did it too, but Mao really refined and developed what we would call identity politics today. It's not what happened in the civil rights movement. That wasn't, it was identity was a concern. It was the political concern, but that wasn't identity politics. The term identity politics was coined by Maoists in the United States in 1977. So the term was never used to mean what it means before that. So that's after the civil rights movement. So it's very clear that what that is a Maoist interpretation. And Mao was really the guy who figured out how to separate the population into distinct groups that you could label and then pit against one another, with the ultimate goal being to not just to punish class enemies, but that had a purpose. The purpose was to get as many people as possible to sign up for the Communist Party line. It was to get as many positive identifying revolutionaries as possible, not just to silence people into fear and submission, but to get people to actively sign up to be revolutionaries. And this whole dynamic. So the rest, the whole beginning part of the book is designed to tell that, explain how that works, and tie it to our contemporary circumstance. And then there's a middle part of the book that talks about effectively what he did to organize education and why our education system derives from Maoist tactics as well and their Soviet predecessors. And then the third part of the book, which is kind of where I am now, talks about the part that I needed to research for was the college students. How was a
Is that
youth
the Red Guard?
rebellion? The Red Guard, that's right.
Yeah.
And then going into the professional world, and then into, actually, they'll want to end the book talking about what happened after Mao. So it's not actually about Mao at all at the end. It's about establishing this new kind of communism, this what I've called 21st century communism or corporatist communism that we see in China today, and we see through the ESG and Sustainable Development Goals movements here in the West today as well. So that's a lot, but it's a book.
I cannot wait to read that book because I truly only recently came to an understanding. The question's always been there. The difference between Marxism, communism, Maoist communism, and I know that they're all part of the same monster with, various, I don't know, appendages or transformations or whatever. And I think the ultimate goal of crushing power over a population, people, whether it's the global population or China or America, is the same. You can correct me on any of this, but there's nuances. And I wanted to understand that. And I interviewed G. Van Fleet. She's wonderful. And Trevor Loudon and others. And I do want to understand that more. What I appreciate is that you are explaining this in a way, well, as an American variation of all of these political ideologies. And I think that that's really important because in America, we have what I call, maybe I coined a phrase, it can't happen nearism. And so there's this bubble, and Americans, because I think we've lived so long under a constitutional government of the rule of law, free speech, and the family for quite some time being considered the most important component or foundation of a free society and a well-functioning society. All of these things, you have the wake or that carries you along. They built it. It started being dismantled somewhere, after Wilson, maybe after FDR, whatever. It started to be dismantled, but you still are in the wake of the prosperity and the residual goodness. So people don't notice. I'm not going to use
Right.
the frog in the pot uh, example, but so they think it can't happen near us, and we're not Venezuela, we're not China, Russia, we're not, you know, what any communist country that's Cuba, whatever. It can't happen here, but James, can it happen here? It's just a different
Yeah,
color
well, it is.
animal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is happening here. It's not can it. It already is, and we're now at the point where people are realizing it. What's not happening, and what maybe couldn't have happened here, and maybe can't happen here, is um, a classic military coup that takes over like Lenin took over in 1917 or like Mao took over in 1949. That is very unlikely to be able to occur here for a variety of reasons. Freedom-loving Americans won't accept it. We're very well armed as a population. There are various reasons. And the Soviets understood that, though. I mean, Nikita Khrushchev said in the 1950s that they would take America without firing a shot. So what Americans have been asleep to. And in fact, both Soviet literature and post-Soviet Russian literature, along with Chinese intelligence literature, has indicated, especially in the 80s and the 90s, is that the United States is very susceptible to a thing called political warfare. As a matter of fact, the Chinese in the 1990s assessed that the Americans are so susceptible, so weak, so uninformed about political warfare and how to engage in and defend itself against political warfare tactics that it might as well not exist. There's no meaningful defense. And so a couple of things happened to take Americans by storm. One was a generational approach. Americans do tend in most regards to be short-term thinkers. It's all about this 4-year election cycle. Who's going to be president next month? It's very short-term thinking. And they don't have great resistance to a generational project, and they don't have great resistance to political subversion. So a lot of things happened that enabled this to occur. One of those things is called the Long March Through the Institutions, which was a deliberate infiltration strategy that was cooked up in the 1960s and it was implemented in the 1970s moving forward. Yeah, the name of the Long March Through the Institutions was named by a guy named Rudy Deutschke, who was a Marxist, and he laid it out in 1966. But what he was laying it out based on was actually what Mao Zedong did, and also the theory that Gramsci wrote. And so the idea is to get inside of institutions by infiltration. So what you would do, it's not like some subterfuge or some sneaky, spy versus spy. This isn't high tech. What you do is you indoctrinate college students so that they have an ideology, and at the same time you teach them to be a computer programmer, and you send them off to a company that programs computers, and he's a little communist in the office. That's it. He's not standing outside throwing rocks at the computer programming capitalist building. He goes and works inside the machine and does agitation and propaganda in his ways just by being who he is. It's a kind of religious evangelism model almost. And so this was the program. And they explicitly, in 1972, Herbert Marcuse explicitly said, it's time to do this. And so the entire New Left following the Vietnam War all mobilized to start going and getting professional jobs, getting professional degrees, and start infiltrating all of the key institutions of society. So there you have infiltration and subversion. Eventually, the idea would be that you would get enough people in positions like HR or enough people on committees or whatever to
Or
start
the
changing the
editorial
internal
board of the
politics.
New York Times or
That's right. And
Mhm.
that's what they focused on was like community guidelines and how how everybody's supposed to act at work. They focused on ways to control the internal culture of the company or the university or the institution and just bent it further and further that way so that within the university where they were the most active and the most successful, You now have you have entire universities that have fewer than 3 or 5% conservatives on campus. They completely took over the culture. And then that becomes a self-fulfilling program as time goes by. The more left it gets, the less conservatives want to be there. And so it just grows in that particular direction. It becomes a huge problem. So when you mix the two things together, that you would have political warfare tactics mixed together, which means political warfare does not use guns. It does not use bombs. It does not use necessarily even things. It can use things like cyber attack, but mostly it uses propaganda. Mostly it gets inside people's heads and misleads them to think about the issues in a way that favors the enemy's agenda. Now, when you have to really get all this put together to understand how it could happen here, though, if you think of it even just as coming from without, I don't think they would have had much of a chance. I think we would have caught on that, oh, the Chinese are trying to do propaganda to us. The Russians are doing, although you'd be shocked at how blind Americans are to how much, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's Qatar or Iran, how much just foreign influence is happening in our country. But okay, maybe we would have caught on to that. But what's being neglected is the internal component, the homegrown communists who were getting radicalized in these universities and going out into all these different departments, who were here in the country. Joseph McCarthy didn't clean them all up, and we're going into things like the United States State Department and then collaborating with China. Why is it that China is the only communist country in history that the United States ended its complete trade blockade with? Why is it that we became the economic engine to grow China by allowing them to become our consumer or our manufacturing base for our consumer economy? Well, that was a deal brokered by the United States State Department and Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller with the Chinese, Deng Xiaoping, who was Mao's successor in particular. So you add in that component. Then you add in 2012 when Obama, who we can identify as being a communist with almost certainty, when Obama modernized it, they called it the Smith-Mundt Act. So in the 1940s, right after World War II, after the height of war propaganda, we were like, wait a minute, this is dangerous. Let's not allow this. And so there's an act passed in 1948 called the Smith-Mundt Act. It might have been 47. I might be off by a year or two. And the Smith-Mundt Act prohibited the intelligence services in the United States government from doing influence operations on the United States population, particularly through the mass media. Well, in 2012, Obama modernized the Smith-Mundt Act to, there's the internet now. There's all this stuff. We have to update the act. We have to update what it covers, and they updated it in such a way that basically it's like a sieve. Like you just pour water in it, just goes straight through. And so now the intelligence community since 2013 have been able to do propaganda against United States citizens. And so now we're in an immersive political warfare environment. And most Americans didn't understand that we were in a political warfare environment until 2020 or 2021. And most of them still don't even have the basic vocabulary of political warfare. So this would be like getting sent to a battlefield with no gun, no helmet, no tools. You're just out there in a t-shirt and shorts.
No compass. You're just, you don't even know maybe who the enemy is across the lines.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. They're all in nests. You can't see anybody. All you know is that there's sounds of bullets sometimes you hear and people getting shot. And that's the analogy. So we've been under relentless infiltration and subversion for at least 50 years. And we've been under relentless political warfare facilitated by our own intelligence communities for at least a decade. And we've only woken up in the last few years
and that was
this
Trump.
Has even happened.
That was Trump, the extreme, yes. As I see it, correct me, throughout any of my observations, but as I see it, that the kind of uniparty model where Republicans are really half the time just Democrats and vice versa, well, not vice versa, but a uniparty, then this man steps in and he won't listen to the rules. He won't play by any of the rules. He won't come out, my esteemed colleague, and
right.
He'll call it whatever he thinks it is. When he's right or when he's wrong, he's just going to say it. And he's saying, I'm going to make big changes. And their extreme reaction to this, I think part of it was just pure shock because they couldn't believe this was happening, um, actually woke a lot of people up, maybe even more so than Trump, what Trump was saying, but watching what they were
Yeah,
doing
right.
to this man.
That's what got
And
me.
then
It woke me
everything
up.
became elevated and stark and in stark relief. It, talk about that.
Yeah, that's like I said, that's what woke me up. I was I had total Trump derangement in 2016. I was behind the curve in catching on to this. I went to college for 13 years. Of course that I kind of got my head twisted up that way. And so, and bless all the college kids who don't, who can
Oh,
stay, clear in their
we
values
should
and stuff.
pray for
But
them.
yeah.
I mean,
So
pray
at
for
any
the
rate,
ones that get turned like you did.
so Trump in 2016 gets elected, and the media in his during his campaign and immediately, I mean, they went bonkers. They went completely bonkers. So even in 2017, while I was still like, oh, I hate Trump, blah blah blah, I'll never vote for Trump. I was following all the never Trump Republicans. I'm like, even Republicans get it. Like, what an idiot. Um, so there I was, and I was like, the only thing that was jarring was why does the media? I remember asking people, why does the media always turn the temperature up, not down on Trump? They could be coming out saying, look, it's just 4 years. We've got checks and balances. That's what the United States is about. We're not going to let him become a dictator. We're going to keep him in control. Supreme Court will keep him under wraps. We're going to veto his bad stuff. We'll work with him when he's doing the right thing. Whatever. It's just 4 years and then we'll get back on track. They didn't do that. They lost their minds like they were about to have a meteor land on their house while their hair was on fire all the time. And then I realized they're not freaking out. They're doing it. They're all of the madness around Trump, all of the insanity around Trump is the media's creation. It's all
Mm.
fake. And that was and then he had of course stolen their term and thrown it back at him and it became his, which was fake news. And so it was by, middle of 2017, I already understood the concept of fake news and there it was. The propaganda machine was now mostly visible to me. Once that happens, it's only a matter of time, right? Until you start to see the lies and the stark relief starts to come out. So I think that you're right. Trump woke that up. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is I don't know how far back we have to go. Maybe it's to Kennedy. Maybe it's before that. I would say Kennedy is definitely a good guess. Certainly in the majority of our lifetimes, there are some people maybe old enough otherwise, Trump was the first actual president of the United States. He was the first person in decades who wasn't a controlled tool of some blob, sometimes it gets called, or uniparty, or deep state or counter state that was actually organizing how the United States would be run. The United States was being run by committee, which in Russian is pronounced Soviet. It was being run by a committee up until Trump. Trump wasn't part of the committee. Everybody else was part of the committee. So Trump didn't do what he was supposed to do, but he also called out a lot of the fake stuff. And like you said, whether he was right or wrong about a lot of things didn't even matter. It just brought into relief that there was this huge propaganda campaign and that the media was acting in a very bizarre way. And somehow it was triggering the left to take their mask off and basically admit that they wanted to throw away the Constitution, that they wanted to pack the courts, that they wanted to fundamentally, as Obama put it, fundamentally transform the United States, not in rhetoric, which is what people thought Obama was giving, but in actuality. And in fact, sometimes that there were Marxists and communists. And this shocked people. Of course, in 2020, they threw COVID, they threw BLM at us back to back, and way more people woke
Antifa.
up. Antifa. Yeah, oh yeah, it's a mostly peaceful protest, I think, were three of the most helpful words to the world that have ever been spoken. That was such a brazen lie by CNN. I mean, you can still picture the guy's face
I
standing there
know.
with a burning building behind him, and it says "mostly peaceful protest" across the bottom of the screen. And they tried to pass that off, and just eyes were opening like crazy. So this is why I'm so encouraged because I think that we woke up very, very quickly. And so you asked me at the beginning what my concerns are is my concerns are getting subverted in a different direction while we're paying attention. What I say is I use a boxing analogy. It's like I'm in the boxing ring, and if all I'm watching is the guy's left hand, he's going to punch me with the right when I'm not looking. And so I don't think these so-called far right radical guys are actually right wing at all, not in a
No.
meaningful sense. I call them the right hand of the left. But the fact is that I am very concerned that they realize that they being the controllers of the world, whoever they are, the World Economic Forum, United Nations, CCP, whatever committees are behind that, whether the Committee of 300 is real, I don't know. Stuff like that. Those guys, whoever's really running stuff, the stakeholders, Bill Gates, John Kerry, whatever club they're in is running stuff. And that they are starting to realize, my concern is they are starting to realize that these left-wing tactics are not going to get them what they want. They're not going to be able to come in through the front door, so to speak. So they're going to have to switch their tactics to generate a reaction, because their goal isn't leftism or rightism. Their goal is their power. Their goal is to secure for themselves monopoly power over the world.
Hmm.
Communism's just a tool. Fascism's just another tool. And if they can get the communists and the fascists fighting, all the normal people wash right out. And all you have to do is pick a side between those two tools that they're using. You can think of it like, puppets on two hands. And if they can keep people fighting both the puppets and or paying attention to the puppets, then you lose everybody normal.
James, there's so many aspects to this. It's like a diamond with 1,000 facets instead of, I don't know what most diamond fast number of facets have, but the it seems to me that we have to understand what's happening. Everybody doesn't need to be a high level expert at it, but we all need to become, it's sort of like part of our DNA again. I remember a couple of decades ago, an article was written, I've still been trying to find this, where they exposed in some Midwestern city that the test to get into high school was that you had to be able to write in, say, 3 languages. You had to know your Latin, your this, your that, and the other. The mathematics was mind-boggling. The grammar, the history, the understanding of literature, all of these things, civics, that they said that when they put this in front of college professors, that they could not pass the test, right? People were so informed and well educated 100 years ago that back trappers that were, I don't know, trapping beaver in the Midwest or on the frontier would have books of philosophy, not only their scriptures, but books of philosophies, because and they understood the Constitution of the United States, and they would fight and argue it. What we have now is so far removed from that. And what I believe that our job, yours, obviously, you're one of the great leaders in this area, is to educate people and, one, try to dismantle this "it can't happen hereism," because they don't see a big red flag in people pulling out guns like in with Lenin or Mao. They think it only is going to happen that way. And so they don't understand that the subtlety is this political warfare and demographic warfare and all these other warfares. It's about education, because the
Hmm.
people have been woken up. They're just not as educated as back in John Adams and Mercy. I think it was John Adams said that the revolution, he didn't like the term revolution, started 15 years before 1775 when the shot was heard around the world, in 1760, because and it happened in the minds and hearts of people. They started to think about the unlawful acts of the British government, and they started talking and
Hmm.
pamphleteering and gathering together in pubs or whatever and talking about. In other words, what I'm saying is that it's happened before like this, but we were on the side of, well, resisting tyranny, and it takes time to do it. 15 years there was a lot of talking before the revolution, and I'm not talking about, of course, in this time, a violent revolution. We are never for that. But to counter the revolution is still,
Yeah, yeah.
a warfare. And isn't it come down to education?
Education's key. I mean, that's basically, in some sense, what I do is try to give people enough color to what they're perceiving so that they understand what it is and what the stakes are and what the kind of landmines are on their path. It's very easy to just blunder into a trap that the enemy's set for you in a war. So you've got to be aware of what those look like. So that part is education. Because what people need, I think people need primarily two things, just in terms of regular individuals. And maybe we could talk about a lot more things, but those two things are discernment and courage. And you don't necessarily, you need a fairly large amount of discernment right now. I don't know that you need a ton of courage, but you need a little bit, which is enough to get over the hump that makes you think that if you say or do anything, something really bad's going to happen to you. So you should just keep your mouth shut, and it's not worth it. And so you need some courage in order to actually do something with what you're learning. But then you need discernment, and discernment is actually mostly a matter of education. I was just talking to somebody the other day. I get invited obviously to speak all over the world and all over the country, and I was in the state of Washington. We were talking about discernment in this small group that I was in, discussing these issues. And the guy said, this one guy said, this is related to his work. He said, do you know how you teach somebody to recognize counterfeit money? And I said, no, I don't. He's like, the way you teach people to recognize counterfeit is that you show them the real thing over and over and over and over and over again so that they can study the real thing closely enough so that they can pick up small deviations. Because the fact is that a counterfeit, say it's a $100 bill, a counterfeit $100 bill looks a lot like, it doesn't look like some little kid or like, drew a picture of Benjamin Franklin. It doesn't look like you took it out of the Monopoly. It looks like a $100 bill, but there are small things that will give away that it's not the real thing. And of course, they build money to make it hard to counterfeit by making, certain things hard for people to reproduce. But the way that you learn to identify counterfeits is by looking at the real article again and again and again and again so that the small things come out. And I said, this reminds me of a quote. Now, I don't take on the full, I don't mind some of it, but I don't take on the full baggage of the guy I'm about to quote, which is Charles Spurgeon. He's a, famous Christian thinker. And what he said was, about this, he said that what's hard for people, he said, is that the discernment is not the difference between right and wrong. It's the difference between right and almost right. And that's really important for people to understand because this is the way the subversion works. It doesn't matter if it's into the Marxist left. It doesn't matter if it's into some fascist reaction the other direction. What it is that you're going to get told something that sounds like the right thing to do. We just got to care about more people the right way. And then boom, you're off getting dragged left, right? Or we've just got to be strong enough to stand up. And now boom, you're getting dragged off with the story of strength into fascism. And it starts off correct. And it starts off looking like you're going the right way. I'd say sometimes that it's like flying an airplane, and there's a huge difference when you set your course. If you're 1 degree off, it's a huge difference by the time you fly across the country where you're going to be. If you're supposed to fly from New York to Los Angeles and you're off by a degree, you might be, pretty far up the coast from Los Angeles. You might miss the city completely just by being off by 1 degree. I should do the math and find out how far off you'd actually be after that flight, just to make the point really clear for people. But the point is you're not going where you think you are. So you mentioned the boil of the frog earlier, right? Another metaphor people give for that is you get asked to move a little bit and you give in. You move in 1 inch at a time. Hey, come 1 inch this way. Come 1 more inch this way. Once you get used to it, 1 more inch. That's the idea of the boiled frog, but now we're moving sideways or whatever instead, right? So, because what happens is you get 3 miles down the road and you say, how did I get here eventually, right? And you don't know how you ended up there. But if you're 1 degree off from the correct course, every however many 100 feet or whatever that you go forward, you've gone off 1 inch. And then you go 100 feet forward more and you're off 1 more inch. And so this is why discernment is so important, to be able to very carefully. So for us, what we need is very, like you said, very clear discernment. Like that comes back to what you were talking about with those trappers and traders. They knew their Constitution. They knew their Bill of Rights. They knew their Declaration of Independence. They probably knew the Federalist Papers. They probably read Common Sense and understood it. They understood the fundamental philosophical underpinnings of American thought and American governance. And it really has to start there. We look at the genuine article and we get it